Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Jared N. Michaud. We'll be talking about Jared's new book, Brightstar. Welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers. This is the podcast where I talk to authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett, as you can see both from it being on the screen. Oh, no, it's over there. There it is. And also from the opening credits. I am myself an author of some 20 novels and a lot more nonfiction than that. My latest novel from a big publisher is The Tangled Stars, which came out from DAW Books back in 2022, an audiobook and ebook. It's a far future outer space science fiction adventure featuring an AI uplifted cat who becomes a starship captain. Little spoiler there, but as you might be able to tell, it has a certain amount of humor in it as well. I am also a publisher. My publishing company is called Shadowpaw Press, named after our black Siberian cat, whose picture adorns every book. And I have 3 new titles from Shadowpaw Press I wanted to blurb off the top here. The first one is this one. It's called The Good Soldier, as you can see, by Nir Yaniv, who was a guest on the podcast. It's a Starship Troopers meets Catch-22 or MASH in outer space. It's a military sci-fi satire, and it's based on a classic anti-war novel called The Good Soldier. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's kind of the Starship Troopers universe in that it's in, armored infantry and all that sort of thing, but not really. So please, if you are intrigued, check that out. The other new one is this one, The Headmasters, by, there's my fingers over his name. There we go. By Mark Morton. This is a YA science fiction, I guess you'd call it a dystopian, near future, after something went really, really wrong at a research facility in Northern Ontario. And these creatures have come through that have attached themselves to the people who are at that research facility and control them, a bit like Heinlein's Puppet Masters. And it's about a girl growing up there and how she finds a way to fight back against these things. And she's about the 3rd generation who has had these things attached to her. So I highly recommend that one as well. And then the other one that came out at about the same time is this one, Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. Shapers of Worlds Volume 4 is the 4th, as you can tell, anthology that features science fiction and fantasy by authors who have been guests on this podcast. Some big names in there, and Lavi Tidhar's in there. Who else? Sherry Lynn Kenyon, Michael Brent Collings. I highly recommend it. Of course I would. And that's also available. Those are all available everywhere. You can get them through any bookstore. You might have to order them, but you can get them through any bookstore. You can get them online, and they're out there in ebook as well. So please check those out. And check out Shadowpaw Press itself at shadowpawpress.com. Coming up this spring, there's a couple of major releases, science fiction fantasy releases. The big one is Robert J. Sawyer's latest novel, The Downloaded, which is currently out there as an Audible ebook original with an A-list cast featuring Brendan Fraser. And I have print rights to it in North America, so please look for that one. And the same day, May 7th, I'll be releasing The Trader's Son, which is a posthumous novel by the late, great Canadian science fiction fantasy author Dave Duncan. And there's actually going to be a joint book launch for those two in Calgary, which I'll be at as well. So that'll be fun at the Calgary Public Library on May 7th. But check that one out as well. There'll be another Dave Duncan novel later in the summer, Corridor to Nightmare, which is a fantasy novel. And the other science fiction fantasy thing coming out this spring, summer is new editions of Arthur Slade's Canadian Chills middle grade science fiction fantasy horror series. Call it a series. There's 3 books. They're not really a trilogy because they're unrelated, but they're all under the Canadian Chills umbrella. And I really loved editing those and bringing them out in new editions with great new cover art by Saskatoon artist Elaine M. Will. So check that out as well. And again, check out Shadowpaw Press at shadowpawpress.com. Okay, that's my advertising blurb off the top of the podcast. Let's get on to today's guest. So, I put on my reading glasses so I can actually read the intro. They don't look that bad, but they make my eyes kind of, the reflections are kind of disturbing. Today's guest is Jared N. Michaud. or Michaud. Jared is a devoted fiction writer driven by a passion for writing that began before he reached age 7, as we will talk about. Influenced by literary giants like C.S. Lewis and Orson Scott Card, he discovered the transformative power of storytelling and at 12 began crafting his first novel. Today, Jared writes from a little house in a little town in Wyoming, where he lives with his wife and 6 children. As a Christian and with a deep love for the truth and appreciation for the values that underlie Western civilization, he endeavors to create myths that will inspire future generations. So that's our guest for today, and let's meet Jared. So, Jared, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much.
We're recording this on the first day of spring. It's well below freezing here in Saskatchewan. I don't know if it's any warmer where you are in Wyoming, but at least it's a way to celebrate the start of spring.
It is above freezing here, at least
Yeah.
that. At least that. And I have some painting today that I have to do, so that's a good thing. I'm
I've got
hmm?
I've got people working next door, which I didn't know about until this morning. So if there are loud banging noises or heavy machinery rumbling, that'll be a problem at my end. But I don't think it's penetrating my office here too much. So
Well, that'd be good. And if I have thumping on my ceiling, it's because I have a 1-year-old running around upstairs. So I'm hoping that won't be a problem, but you never know.
oh, I've had pet noises and jackhammers and everything else and leaf blowers in the background of interviews over the years I've been doing this. So well,
Gotcha.
we're going to talk about your new novel, your first
hmm
novel, Brightstar, YA novel. But
hmm
first, I want to, as I used to say, I always said this in the audio version when this was only an audio podcast. I always started by saying, I want to take you back into the mists of time, which
Okay.
is further back for some of us than others. But tell me about where you grew up and how you got interested in stories and writing your own stories. What was your writing journey?
Okay. So I actually grew up about 20, 30 miles from where I'm sitting right now. It was 15 miles from the nearest town, which had about 200 people and no grocery store, and 45 minutes drive from the nearest grocery store, which I know that's unusual for most people, but here, kind of out in the West, between all of the civilization,
Yeah,
that's
I've driven through Wyoming, and it was one of the emptier places I've ever driven through. Not that Saskatchewan is exactly packed with people, but that's mostly up north where it's mostly empty. Down around the U.S. border, it's a little more populated.
yeah. Well, we definitely have the fewest residents of any state in the US. So it is definitely pretty empty. And in certain places it's pretty, but I live on the high plains prairie, which I know that's probably fairly similar to where you are. It's dry and brown most of the year with tall grass here and there and lots of fields and animals. And I was homeschooled growing up, which means that um, I didn't go to school. I didn't have a lot of friends that I was spending a lot of time with. I had to absorb myself in other things, and I loved to read ever since I could read, which I got into pretty young. I loved to read. And then once I could read, I started to make up imaginary stories. And this was uh, partly driven by the fact that I didn't have a real easy childhood. I had some trouble in my home, and so this was kind of where I went to escape, was my imagination. And eventually I started building my own imaginary world. And that world was actually the basis for the universe that I used for this book. But um, going back to the situation a little bit, I started writing when I was about 07 or something. Started working on my first novel when I was 12. Took me 4 years, 250,000 words, and it was a total waste of paper, but obviously a beautiful use of time because it taught me how to write. So, that was a good thing. And what I actually wrote then was a prequel to this book. And once I got to the point where I totally decided that it was unpublishable, I had no question in my mind it was unpublishable. I set it down for a few years, wrote some poetry, did some short stuff. Um, when I first got married, I tried writing again, slightly shorter format, some novellas, some fantasy stuff. And That didn't work out the way I'd hoped. So I put the whole thing down it ended up being about 20 years before I got back to this story. And so a year and a half or so ago, I ended up quitting my job for unrelated reasons, had some savings set aside and decided this is a great time to write a story. My first novel that I can give it some undivided attention. And so I sat down and I actually did it. I got through it. And the publishing process actually for me was kind of interesting because the whole time I was writing, I was asking God, if you've got something for me for publishing for this, you got to show me, because I don't know anybody in the publishing industry. I don't know anything about this. I get finished and I asked two people online to help me out. One of them I asked to be a beta reader, and the other I asked if he would just read the book and recommend it to his followers if he liked it. And he says, sure, my uncle's a publisher, right? No, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So submitted the book to them and it was accepted. First publisher I tried. First, no rejections, which is kind of amazing. I didn't expect that or anything, but that's the way it ended up working out. So
You mentioned obviously that reading was a big reason why you turned to writing, as it is for most of us. I mean, I was like you, reading that all kinds of stuff very early. But
yeah.
I did always gravitate to science fiction and fantasy. Were there particular authors that have influenced you?
Oh yeah. Well, when I was real young, I really enjoyed books like Tom Swift, the Tom Swift series, which had a
I've
bit of
read a
an
few of those.
engineering bent. It had a bit of an engineering bent. It was a little on the sci-fi side, a little on the fantasy side, and um, very, very much hard on the sci-fi side if you had to peg it somewhere. And then as time went on, I read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and that one was an instant favorite. And um, I got more and more into the science fiction as I got older, and as I found more of it. I'm having trouble remembering all of the early stuff, but I got a hold of Wheel of Time at a pretty young age, and I dug through those books and um, found David Weber, a sci-fi author, fairly early, and loved a lot of his stuff. He's written quite a variety of science fiction stuff. Um, Same with, let's see, John Ringo's another one. Just some, I have a hard time calling them to mind on command, but there are dozens of authors that I have loved as I've gone through. I would say
I
that,
should.
yeah, go
I, should,
ahead.
I was going to say it was interesting. I've interviewed Orson Scott Card on the podcast, and I've interviewed David Weber on the podcast. So,
Have you really? I'm
yeah.
totally jealous. That's awesome. I
Orson Scott Card is notable for having given the longest interview. I had to split his over two over two episodes because he's
Wow.
very voluble and he's used to media. So if you don't interrupt him, he just keeps talking. But I didn't object to that because it made for a very interesting two episodes. This was back in my first year, I think, when I talked to him. So
That's
yeah, and I know all of those authors, of course, and I've read most of them that you mentioned already, and I'm sure we have a lot of others in common. You said you started working on this as writing stories as a young writer.
mhm.
Did you share your stories with people at that point? And you've done some poetry and short fiction stuff, but especially
Yeah.
as a young writer, I'm always curious if you were sharing it with other people.
Actually, I was. I When I first published this novel, I would talk to some of my cousins about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember that first book you wrote. I remember sitting at the table with the whole thing printed out and reading it back when we were kids." So, yeah, and I had one cousin order like a whole bunch of copies of this so that he could hand them out to friends and stuff, which was pretty neat. So,
Now, I guess we're going to talk about Brightstar, which we've been obliquely talking about.
yeah.
So maybe give a synopsis of the story without, yes, there's the cover. It's a good
Uh-huh.
cover. Uh,
Thank you.
Give a synopsis of the story about what it's about, and then we'll talk about why you wrote it.
Absolutely. So, um, Brightstar is about a boy from our world who hasn't got a very nice life. He's young teen, and he's sort of by surprise transported to an entirely different world. He's autistic, and that autism is sort of transformed because of the change in worlds into a near superpower. He can control this energy force that is the basis of his universe, the new universe. And he makes some new friends, goes through an adventure in this new environment. And, I'm one book into what I'm thinking of as probably a 4 or 5 book cycle, and I'm actually editing the second one right now. So, what I would say about his journey is that it's sort of an odyssey. I've called it, when I was in the process of writing it, sort of a odyssey in space type of adventure. But as you probably caught
I
from
wouldn't call it a
him,
space odyssey.
yeah, absolutely. But you know how the Odyssey is sort of episodic and it doesn't have a character arc exactly.
No.
That's how this sort of started. Was it had these different episodes in it, and it has a character arc, but it wasn't front and center when I started. I actually, during the editing, had to go in and bring it out some. But the idea was just that it was a space odyssey, sort of like you say. And then it has elements of C.S. Lewis's Narnia series in it because he is transported from this world to another. And that's sort of my homage to C.S. Lewis in a sense, because I really love Lewis.
So, what was the driving force behind you telling this particular story? On your website, you talk quite a bit about the importance of myth and story. So let's
Yeah.
delve into that a little bit. Why? What are you trying to achieve? What do you hope you can achieve with these books?
Well, I'm going to have to back up a little bit and give some context. Before I came down here to talk to you, I was looking out the window and I was going, oh, there's a wheelbarrow in my son's garden next to my pickup. And that is a story. Most of the substance of the world we live in, it isn't so much things and actions and whatever. It's actually story. The way we communicate, the way we think about things, we tell stories. So we know what a garden is because when I say that, people understand that you plant seeds in the ground and they grow, and that is what makes a garden. But that is a story. A pickup, that's a story. It's a vehicle that carries you from here to there. But all of that stuff that we put together in our minds, it isn't the physical object so much as the idea of it. So the substance of the reality that we live in is actually sort of made of story, at least in our minds, right? Not the physical, but the way we think about things, the way we process the world is almost completely story, a narrative that we begin assembling when we're very young. And so when we write stories, we have a tremendous influence on our audience's thinking, on the way they live. When I resurrected the Twitter account for the Energemetra 6 universe, that Twitter account was, oh, I had tried using it for a video game, and that didn't work out. But I was looking around for people to follow and for whatever you do on social media, and I found a tweet that I could have hugged the guy. He says, "Some guys choose one book and make it their whole personality. For me, it's Starship Troopers." And I'm like, yes, thank you, because he's illustrating perfectly the point that when we encounter a story, it can affect us in a very deep way, right? It's often, whether or not we process it completely, it affects, if we love the story, it affects a huge amount of how we live. So as a writer, I don't know about you, but to me, there are three things that that I try to do. One is to tell an engaging story, to tell us an entertaining story, something that readers will enjoy. That's, what would you call it? The base requirement, the first thing that you have to do. The second one is to put some part of myself into my characters. So, um, if people can relate to the characters, that's probably because there's some unique or some not unique, some valid experience there that they can see in their own lives, something that draws them into that story. And then the third thing is a little harder to get a handle on, but um, out in the world, there are truths, important things. When we look at great art, it's great art because the artist managed to capture something out of the world that was important and leave it there in his work for readers to see. And that's true of the most important stories that we as readers, as people, encounter, the ones that appeal to huge numbers of people, um, or that hold our attention for more than just a short period. It's because they manage to get a hold of some truth that's important and leave it there for people to see. At least I think that's fair, wouldn't you say?
I'm sorry you dropped out on me there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Um,
That question.
yeah. Uh, would you say that that's the case, that the great stories, the ones that are really important, have truth in them, that people find it and they want to, they make it a part of their lives, and that's what makes it a great story?
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, obviously, the stories that resonate with people are the ones that, well, that they resonate with, the ones that
Right.
they find something in the story that speaks to them in a deeper level than just the entertainment level, and those are the ones that they remember and carry forward with them. And I think everything we read influences us because it's changing the pathways in our brain, basically. So
Absolutely.
as you find better stories, then hopefully you change the pathways in your brain for the better as well.
One would hope so. And the one of the things that I've happened upon as I've been doing this is the idea of the monomyth. And I'm sure you know what that is, but the idea is that there is a story form, or you could almost call it an ideal story, that people keep reaching for and they keep pointing to with their stories. And um, I think that points back to Jesus Christ and his life. And that when we see stories in history like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, or some of the better myth writers whose stories have lasted a good long time, it's because they managed to capture that was something that pointed back to that. And even Star Wars, George Lucas intentionally tried to write a story that hung in there pretty closely with the monomyth. And so when I was writing, I went, what we as a society are sort of dreadfully in need of right now is stories that people resonate with, because a lot of the mainstream stuff is just preaching, and your right to preach in a story is directly proportional to and less than your ability to tell an entertaining story. It's just, it's a plague. Anyway, I won't get into that too much, but the point is, when you want a good story, it's because you're offering something useful. And that's what I care about. That's what I aspire to. And I'm encouraging other people to at the same time, I hope.
Do you? Okay, this is your first novel.
Yeah.
Um, do you feel you've gotten there, or is it something you will continue to work and improve as you go forward?
Oh gosh. It's something that I may have touched a little bit. It's something that the whole man's reach must exceed his grasp, else what's a heaven for? I I don't even think that I don't even think I'm close, but I'm working at it, and it's something, like I say, to aspire to. And along with that, you end up with the different elements that go into it. It's like the autism. My main character is
Okay.
autistic, and I did that because it's an experience I have that I hadn't actually intended to include that, but it's something that I haven't seen it in a lot of stories where the main character is autistic and it isn't the focus of the story. It's just part of the scenery, essentially, and something that ends up becoming important for plot reasons, but it doesn't have to be like the whole point of things. It's just part of things. I don't know.
Interestingly, there's a novel I'm publishing through, because I run a publishing company,
Hmm.
Shadowclaw Press, a traditional publishing company, and one of the novels that I have coming out in my fall list is has a character. It's not specified, um, autistic, something similar to that going on. He's a main driving force in the story, but it's not because of that. That's not what the story is about. But he's a character who's the twin brother of the really main character, and it influences everything that she does because of her love for her brother and what So I have seen it in a couple of things. There was a literary novel that I republished called Small Reckonings. It's not an autistic character, but it very much goes around a child who's in the 20s in Saskatchewan with Down syndrome, and the
Ah,
doctors are saying, well, you want to ship them off. You don't want to try to deal with them, and it's all about no, they're loved and they're part of the family. So
yeah,
I have seen a little bit of that.
interesting. Well, and
Now I want to go back
yeah,
to your. Oh, sorry.
no, no. I was just gonna say, I guess I have an issue with people who try to build an entire like agenda on that, but having it be part of the story is a good thing because it draws in an experience that a chunk of your readers have. But anyway, that's all I wanted. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
I was just going to say I wanted to go back to your process just a little bit. You
Yeah.
mentioned beta readers earlier on, and I noticed you had a call at some point for a book launch. I don't know, committee group.
Well,
Was that what is your process once you had this thing written? Uh, how did you go about the revisions?
okay. So the way I went about it was I wrote what I thought was the full book, and it ended up being two because I sent it off to my beta readers, and I had about 10 different people read it. Everybody from young people to older people, any sort of walk of life I could get a hold of. I had people I trusted read the book, get back to me with feedback, got some surprising feedback that actually really helped, sort of saved the book in certain ways. And then when I finished all of that, I went to the publisher and uh, got it accepted. And then um, they don't take the copyright to the book, which means in my case that they said you have to hire a professional editor on your own dime. So we don't uh, we don't have any say in what actually goes on the page. After a certain point, that's up to you,
Hmm.
um, which is interesting.
That's a
But
very different model.
I know it is, but it actually fit what I was doing perfectly because I have strong feelings about that sort of thing. So I found a professional editor who agreed to do the work. Excuse me, to do the work on it, and um, we went through it over the course of a few months. First, did some uh, what would you call it? It's the my mind is blanking here. It's the editing that you
Developmental
do. Yeah,
editing.
developmental. Thank you. We did a little bit of
Yeah.
developmental editing. Did some for Flow. Then a different member of their group went through and did a copy edit for me and some style stuff. And then after that, the publisher said, "Okay, well, to get it into bookstores, we need several months. But now that it's edited, there's no reason that you can't have a produced book that you have copies of to start getting in people's hands. So my sort of strategy for getting the word out about the book was to do uh, an open eARC, which just means electronic advanced reader copies, where I go around and ask anybody who will listen if they want to read the book and give them a free digital copy for a period of a couple of months. And then for a few select ones, I had a book launch team where I actually mailed out signed copies of the book to people who liked it and wanted to help me
Oh,
promote it. So because I'm a new author and I have zero, I have zero audience, zero readership, I had to come up with whatever I could for a strategy, and that's what I landed on. I don't know how effective it's been. I sort of wish I had your
well,
experience. I really do.
well, as I often say, I was a journalism major at university, and I had to take a public relations course. And I only remember two things from that course. One of which was "Don't lie to the press," which is largely goes out the window in public relations, I think. But the other one was 90% of PR is wasted, but nobody knows which 90% it is, which is a version of Sturgeon's law and other things like that. And unfortunately, even though I'm doing this, and I have distribution network and books going out and all of that, I haven't talked to anybody that really has a handle on promotion. A lot of it comes down to word of mouth. That is ultimately the best promotional tool you've got. And, so the approach you've taken can help with that. What has been the response to those eARC readers? And have you been pleased with the feedback you've gotten back?
As near as I can tell, I get about 1 in 10 people just don't finish the book. And this is from the, 20 or 30 different original people I found who I maintained contact with from the eARC list. About 1 in 10 don't finish the book. And then 50% of them come back to me and ask, okay, so when's the next one?
Well, that's always a
So
good thing to hear.
I hope so. I hope so. I had, of my original beta readers, I had two of them who were super, super enthusiastic, and the rest I got pretty solid. Yeah, that was good. And then I had one who was kind of didn't really get into it. So I'm hoping that ratio continues, but that was sort of the feedback I wound up with.
Now, we're recording this, as I said, on the first day of spring, and it's going to go live this coming Sunday, so 3 days from now, I guess. Um, the,
Um,
the book itself doesn't come out till April 16th, is that right?
that's right. Technically hits bookstores April 16th. And that'll be wherever you get your books. I tell people, find a small bookseller and buy books from them if you buy books on any regular basis, because we need to support local businesses. We need to support small businesses. The big guys aren't hurting. We need to help our smaller uh, booksellers, our smaller businesses locally.
Yeah, independent booksellers are important. For my publishing company, when I see the sales figures coming back from the distributor, um, if we're lucky, as a very, very small publisher, I have to be very lucky and have the right project to get national distribution through Indigo chapters, which bumps up the numbers a lot. But most of my sales appear to be to small independent booksellers. So I heartily endorse that sentiment.
Absolutely. And I I ought to pick your brain. You have so much more experience in this stuff than I do. I know you say that you don't know which 90%'s wasted, but I tell you what, I'm just blundering around here, not even knowing what makes up a strategy for selling books most of the time. I
Yeah,
actually
well,
think that's the most intimidating part of this, to be
it is,
honest.
and there's tons and tons, and I don't have any special insight, as I said. There's tons and tons of advice online, and some of it contradicts each other. So, well, what
Oh,
are you
for
working
sure.
on now? I guess you said you're editing the second book. So, are you writing the third one while you're editing the second one, or is it one book at a time?
I'm Well, actually, I ended up writing a couple of short stories set in the same universe, and I'm
Hmm.
thinking about self-publishing a little anthology of, you know, just 3 or 4 short stories, nothing too long. But when I go to conventions, I want to have more than one book in front of me if I can. And then, so I've done some of that. And then I am editing the second one, getting ready to send it off to a professional editor. And I am writing the third one, as you say. So all of that at the same time, along with building a little room in my basement as a sound studio here. So got a lot of projects going on, a lot of irons in the fire.
And where can people keep up with you online?
Absolutely. e6universe.com is the fiction website. That's where you find the most of my work. You can get me at jarednmichaud.com. And if you do social media, it's Jared Michaud Author on Facebook. On X, you'd find me at Energemetra6 or at Jared N. Michaud. Same on Instagram.
How do you spell Energemetric 6?
Yeah, that's fair. ENERGEMATRICE 6 is the name of the universe and the website.
I will have a link to all of this on the website for the Worldshapers itself, but of course on the YouTube video it doesn't show up. So
absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for being on, Jared. I enjoyed the chat. I hope you did as well.
I did, and thank you. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Best of luck with the launch of the book on April 16th. I hope you find lots and lots of readers.
Thank you, sir.
And thanks again to Jared for being on today. I enjoyed talking with him, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as well. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. Just a few housekeeping things to wrap up with. You can find The Worldshapers online at theworldshapers.com. All the past episodes are readily available on the website there, and some of them even have full transcripts. I had to give that up because of the time commitment. But all of them are there. We're at episode 160 something, I forget. And you can also find the Worldshapers on X/Twitter at the Worldshapers, on Facebook at the Worldshapers. You can find Shadowpaw Press, which I mentioned off the top, at shadowpawpress.com. You can find it on Twitter at Shadowpaw Press. You can find it on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press. You can find me, very important, at edwardwillett.com. That's just my name.com. You can find me on X/Twitter at ewillett. You can find me on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. You can find me on Facebook at edward.willett. And you can find me on YouTube at Edward Willett. And which may very well be where you are right now on my YouTube channel, if you subscribe, you will not only get notified whenever there's a new episode of The Worldshapers, but you will also get notified when I do one of my walks around my hometown of Regina, Saskatchewan, which is something I've been doing for, I guess, 3 years now, this spring. And just walk around, and I talk as I walk and point out the sites here in my home city of Regina. It seems to be relatively popular, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, please check it out. Oh, you also find some music, because I sing and other stuff like that on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't, please consider subscribing. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. I will be back next week with a new guest, and I hope to see you then. So bye for now.